Discussing the mission to Afghanistan for Queen and Country. We've been talking a little bit about the British objectives, but let's change direction a little bit and try and look at what the people of Afghanistan may be looking for. Lord Ashdown, Paddy Ashdown and Rory Stewart are both still with us, and we're also joined by Ajmal Khan Zazai, an Afghan tribal chief from the Pashto region in the southeast. Welcome to you indeed. I heard the talk there about this objective of establishing, if not a fully democratic government, an accountable government from the centre. That is a clear objective of the Western powers involved in Afghanistan. Is it one that you understand or sympathise with?
Let me start with conveying my condolences and deepest sympathy to the families who has lost their loved ones in Afghanistan, and we're extremely sorry of the death of Sarah Bryant, a woman who served in Afghanistan, and she was unfortunately killed. That shows that the Afghans, the Pashtuns, will never attack women and children. That itself it shows that not a lot of the Talibans are Pashtuns. But anyway, the Afghan form of democracy, which is the Loya Jirga. Let me explain that. What Loya Jirga is? Loya Jirga is comprised of the tribal chiefs, the intellectuals, the politicians, the Afghan royal family. They comprise the Loya Jirga, and this is one of the ancient form of democracy which has worked in Afghanistan for centuries for us. Now, we have a situation in Afghanistan, Adam. The present democracy failed, unfortunately. The present government has failed because of the corruption, because of the warlords are in that government. Now, in order to work that government and make it successful, we have to inject, I'm afraid, a different injection.
So you're basically saying that the Karzai government and the people that he's brought into associated with that government are simply the wrong people to lead the country?
Well, Karzai himself was going very well in 2004. We went outside and we voted for him. He got 54% votes mainly from the Afghans who wanted to have a change, a better change for the country. But when he was appointed as the president and he made his cabinet, the first thing he did was compromising with the warlords, the same people who committed atrocities against the nation. Look at the parliament. We have 88 to 90% the presence of the warlords who has committed atrocities against the same nation. Now, when the nation saw this, plus a lot of things happened, like the indiscriminate bombing of the villages, and it all utilized, unfortunately. And this is what I categorically said: we have a war in hands.
Do you see, Roy Stewart, this argument? Do you see a distinction between warlords and tribal chiefs and having a Loya Jirga? Or
what I see is an unbelievably complex situation, and something that it's extremely difficult for us to explain to the public, to explain to the Afghan people. And the question is, are we up to it? Can we cope with this kind of situation? We're hearing about warlords. We're hearing about corruption in government, tribal chiefs, royal families.
But there is a constitutional system which has been established with Karzai at the head, with elections at intervals. I mean, are you saying that's whistling in the wind, effectively?
This is probably the fourth poorest country in the world. 70% of people in Afghanistan can't read and write. You go to a clinic, you get 3 aspirin and a pat on the head. This is a very, very fragile, traumatized country. We can't really expect to come into a country like that and within 20 or 30 years transform it into a stable state. We don't know what we're doing, we don't have the power to do it, and we don't have the legitimacy, we don't have the consent or the support from the Afghan people to do that kind of thing.
Paddy Ashdown, is there any alternative but to try and go down the political direction which has been established?
No, I don't think there is. And if someone said to me, what is the primary problem, it actually isn't military. It is the fact that the international community hasn't got a clear strategy, hasn't got a united voice, and is therefore not able to engage in the dialogue about what's appropriate for Afghanistan. I think there's a second-tier problem to which the chief quite rightly refers, and I think there's a great deal in what he says, that we brought in a Western-style constitution with the Western-style structure of democracy that took too little account of existing Afghan traditional structures. And by the way, and here where Rory's right, we imposed a system of elections which is so expensive that there is no way that Afghanistan can pay for it. I mean, the last elections were paid for largely by the international community, and the next ones will have to be so too. One of the things I think that needs to be done, and incidentally one of the pillars of what I was planning to do if I'd have gone to Afghanistan, was to try and ensure that the democratic structures in existing in Afghanistan run with the grain of the traditional Afghan tribal structures. And I think our failure, once again, we did it in Iraq as well, to take account of local traditions, local structures when we constructed this model democracy is one of, but in my view, not the major reason why our operation there is in such difficulty and is so close, it seems to me, to failing.
On that basis, I mean, was it correct to allow President Karzai to have a veto on your appointment?
Yes, absolutely. And not only do I, one of the things I believe most profoundly from my time in Bosnia is it's simply unacceptable for the international community to do what they did with me in Bosnia, decide who's going to go and do these very important jobs without even consulting the local country and the local community. So he was absolutely right. It's absolutely right that he should have that power. And although, I mean, by the way, I'm not weeping about not being there. I'm very glad to be where I am now, as you can see. But I understand why the local politics that he had to live with in Afghanistan meant that there was an advantage to him in taking that decision. So no, I don't have any criticism of President Karzai in expressing his voice in this, and I understand why he took the decision he took, even though I think it may not be necessarily helpful in the long run either to him or to Afghanistan.
Do you think there's too much trust vested in the personage of the President Karzai?
I didn't get the question, sorry.
Are we placing too much emphasis on President Karzai? Should the outsiders, if you like, who are now interested parties in Afghanistan, be seeking different power structures?
Well, Adam, I think he's one of the strongest Afghan presidents we ever had. The whole world backed him with all the billions. Yeah. He could have changed the history of Afghanistan. He could have put the country in the right direction, but unfortunately never happened. Now, I would like to quote Lord Ashdown, and I would like to say a few things about him. I think the world is watching, and a lot of the Afghan tribal people, the Afghan nation is watching.
Not libelous, I hope. No.
Lord Ashdown had quoted in his excellent book, which I read after I learned about him, Swords and Plowshares, that endemic corruption had brought Bosnia very close to the status of a criminal state because the international community had thought elections were more important than the common rule of law. Those who had prosecuted the war and profited from it were elected as the politician to run the country.
And do you feel that's happened in Afghanistan?
It exactly happened in Afghanistan. Now, I would like to say...
Is that your view, Rory?
Yeah, I think if you talk to an average Afghan, they're pretty disillusioned, they're pretty cross, they feel security's getting worse, they feel there's an enormous amount of corruption, they feel their economic life is getting worse.
Is there a rule of law?
No, I'm trying at the moment, I'm living in Kabul, I'm trying to negotiate with my landlady at the moment. There's absolutely no way anyone would go anywhere near a court. Everybody goes to informal tribal mediation because nobody trusts the police, they don't trust the justice system, and the question is, do we as foreigners have the power or the knowledge to sort that kind of thing out? And my guess is we don't. Afghans themselves might be able to in the long term, but all we can do is provide a bit of development assistance and try to defend our national interests.
Paddy Ashdown, do you get that sense that the lessons that you learnt in Bosnia and indeed you put down in your book have simply not been learnt in Afghanistan?
Largely, I'm afraid, yes. And the crucial lesson, I mean, what Rory says is, I regret to say, correct. What the chief says is, I regret to say, correct. There's clearly the Afghan government is being hobbled by very, very deeply laid corruption, and it extends to a very high level. And I think that is indeed undermining the confidence of the Afghan people in the Afghan governmental structures. And by the way, we are there as the international community to make those effective. So it affects our aim too. But I think the primary problem here, and I come back to it time and again, the issue, if you had more troops, if you could solve some of these issues, you would still not be able to make the operation work. We are now putting into Afghanistan 1/25th the amount of troops and 1/50th the amount of aid per head of population as you put into Bosnia and Kosovo. That doesn't mean to say you fail, but if on top of lack of resources, the international community doesn't have a strategy, doesn't speak with the united voice, and isn't acting together, and that is the problem in Afghanistan, then you turn the possibility of failure into the probability of failure. So and I regret to say that's what's happened.
On that basis, would you agree with Rory Stewart that perhaps the thing to do is simply to concentrate on what development assistance you can provide?
No, I set